I go camping with my dad every summer. He's done it his whole life, and recently I've gotten into it as well. I'm 16, and last year my dad and I went out on our seasonal camping trip. We found the spot online together while looking for a new camping area to try out for the summer. There's no pictures of the area, but the map was easy to follow, and the description of the trail was that it was easy and uncrowded. We set out on Friday morning, parking on the side of the road and beginning down the trail. After the first quarter mile, it was clear that the description wasn't very accurate. It was pretty steep in some parts, and a lot of the trail was muddy or overgrown, which made it actually really hard. Already being there though, we just pushed through and eventually got to the campsite. It looked no different than the woods on the trail that we had been walking on for the past 2 hours. There were trees everywhere, and just a plot of overgrown grass to set our stuff up on. No cool views or anything. We pitched our tents and made lunch. My dad was a bit of a talker, so the rest of the day we were just in conversation. Once the sun was starting to set, we walked around the trees near the campsite and collected some dry sticks to make a fire with. In the middle of us talking though, we were interrupted by a loud voice behind us. We both stopped talking and spun around. The woods were suddenly quiet again, and we didn't see anyone there. It sounded not too far away though, like maybe a mile out. Neither of us said anything for 30 seconds, just staring at the trees and trying to spot any movement. Then it came again. Someone, a man's voice, yelling. It sent chills through me. There was a pain and harshness to the scream, like they were in trouble. I looked up at my dad, who looked really conflicted and worried. He turned me around and led me back to the campsite, quickly starting the fire. The screams kept coming though, and eventually I asked my dad if we should help them. I could tell my dad was thinking of every option. He faced me and told me to stay by the fire and wait. His face was serious, and he said he was going to run a little ways toward the voice and just see what he could see, and that if I saw anyone, to not let them near me. I agreed and watched him run toward the man's voice. After a minute, he was out of sight. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I would have done if I were in my dad's shoes. Leaving someone in need of serious help would make me feel horrible, but we were also in the middle of the woods, so if something happens, well, I don't know. After 10 minutes, I started to get a little worried. The sun felt like it was dropping fast, and there was still no sign of my dad. But then, suddenly, the screaming stopped. The whole forest was now quiet again. I wondered if my dad had found him and was helping him, or if something else happened. Still, after another 10 minutes, my dad was nowhere in sight. With the blanket of darkness starting to cover the forest, I grew more and more nervous. I stood up and walked a little bit away from the campsite and toward where my dad had gone. There were still no signs of him, so I walked a little more, and then, finally, I heard footsteps from up ahead. I still couldn't see anything, but as the sound of his steps started getting closer and closer, an eerie, almost disturbing feeling came over me. Then, just before I thought they would come into my sight, a voice to my left called my name. It was my dad running toward me and yelling at me to go back. There was urgency and worry in his voice, so I hurried to the campsite and my dad followed behind me. He quickly packed the essentials into his backpack. The look on my dad's face is something I still remember vividly. It was complete fear and distraught. We left the tents and ran for the first mile, then fast walked back to our car. On the drive home, I asked him what he saw out there, who the man was, and why he was screaming. My dad said nothing. Even to this day, he never brings it up or says anything of what he saw. Every time I so much as mention that day, his entire demeanor changes and his face falls flat. So I just stopped asking. All I can think about now is those footsteps that I heard walking toward me, and what would have happened if my dad hadn't shown up in time. Fall had just started, and around here the weather becomes cool and breezy, and in my opinion, it's the best type of weather. It's definitely my favorite season, and last year it was no different. Around early October, I went out and bought some Halloween decorations before work one day, planning to set them up outside once I got home. Due to a coworker calling off though, I had to stay late and didn't get out until 7. I drove home as quickly as I could and started getting to work. It was kind of dark out, but with my outdoor lights on, it wasn't too bad. I started with setting up the orange lights on my bushes, and as I did, some guy came around the side of my house. He startled me, just walking up without saying a word. I found it kinda rude, so I made sure to tell him off. "Hey, you're on my property. Can you leave?" The guy looked at me with a straight face and said, "Sure thing," and started wandering down to the road. He looked 40 with short brown hair, and the way he was acting was almost like he was homeless or something. He had no care in the world and seemed to have no direction. I continued with setting up the lights, but I couldn't help but notice that the man never really left. He was on the other side of the road, wandering around, and several times I even caught him looking over at me. It was really creepy, and I ended up just going inside after finishing the lights. I had no idea who this guy was, or what he was doing by my house. I tried to tell myself it was just some harmless homeless man with no sense of boundaries, and went on with my night. I made dinner and went up to my room to watch some TV in bed. As I was upstairs, I heard something below me. It sounded like something slowly sliding on the ground. I paused the TV, but I couldn't hear it anymore. On any normal day, I probably wouldn't even check it out, but having seen that guy earlier, I just had a weird feeling. So I got up and walked downstairs. Strangely, I noticed right away that all the lights were off, which I could have sworn I didn't turn off yet. I walked a little further and into the hallway, flicking on the overhead light, then stopping to listen again. It was still quiet, however, there was a low ambient noise. It was wind howling through the rooms. I moved up to the back of the house, where I could now see the sliding back door was wide open. I felt my stomach tighten, knowing that's exactly what I heard from upstairs. Someone slowly opening the back door. At this point, I wasn't sure if I should just run out of the house or run back upstairs to get my phone. The answer is probably obvious now, but in the moment, it was hard to think straight. I wasn't even sure if someone had actually entered my home or not. I felt my adrenaline pumping as I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" I walked up to the door and looked outside quickly, not seeing anyone. I then turned back around, and somehow I managed to spot the faintest outline of a person standing in the other room, completely covered by darkness. I let out a literal gasp when I saw them. and by doing that, I think I unintentionally showed them that their cover was blown, because immediately after, he came running at me. I only saw him in the light for a fraction of a second before running out the door, but I was sure it was the same man I saw outside. As I ran through my backyard, I could hear his footsteps catching up behind me. I ran up to the closest house and started banging on the door, screaming for help. Luckily, they opened up somewhat quickly, and as I entered their home, the man stood in their front yard and just stared me down. We called the cops, but the guy had run off. It's pretty clear that while I was at work that day, the man had broken the lock on my door. Then, during the night, he tried to sneak inside my home. Had I not heard the door opening, or not noticed him hiding in the dark, who knows what he would have done that night. I'm 29, and I live along the Appalachian Range in lower West Virginia. I've been going backpacking and camping for years, exploring different trails all around the nearby mountains. My best friend, who lived just a few miles from me, would often join me on these hikes. We usually planned one big trail every year in the fall, being anywhere from a few days to a whole week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we planned to take a trail across the range to a small lake at the top of the mountains. In the days leading up to the trip though, my friend had to call it off because of an emergency at his work. I'd already taken the whole week off of work and had everything ready to go, so I decided to just go alone. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead, then started my route. This wasn't a regular recreational trail like you'd typically see on a 4-hour hike. These backpacking trails didn't have defined paths, so you have to use maps, compasses, and landmarks to navigate where you're going. Typically there's a large landmark in the distance, like a specific rock formation that you hike toward, and when you get there you can see your next landmark, and so on. I spent the first 2 days hiking toward a ridge in the mountains. When it got dark on the second day, I set up camp several hours from reaching the ridge. I pitched the tent and got a fire going, then heated up some of the food I brought in my bag. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 o'clock when I laid in my tent to rest and read. I left the fire going, planning to put it out before actually sleeping. 20 minutes into reading, and through the fire crackling outside, I heard the strong sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. I jolted up. My first thought was a black bear, possibly having smelled the food I cooked earlier. I didn't hear anything else though. I crawled out of the tent and shined a flashlight into the tree line behind my tent. Nothing. I called out aggressively to scare away any predators, but again, there were no sounds of anything running away. It was really strange because the stick snapping was very distinct, definitely being from something stepping on it. I stayed outside the tent for a while, looking around constantly, before putting out the fire and going inside. I found it really hard to sleep that night because I was so focused on listening for more sounds. In the morning, I was almost surprised to have even slept through the night. I packed my tent and everything else at the campsite, then continued along until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight shot to the lake. I was moving fast, trying to get there before dark so I wouldn't have to move my campsite again the next day. I arrived with about an hour to spare before sunset. The lake was beautiful, very much worth the hike. I walked around it, enjoying the scenery, then pitched the tent and set up my camp on the tree line beside the lake. As I sat by the fire, I kept turning around, hearing soft noises somewhere between the trees behind me. I figured I was just being paranoid, but it was really creepy. It almost sounded exactly like footsteps, but I knew nobody would be out here. I would have seen their tent when I walked around the lake. It was too dark at this point to see anything further than a few feet, so looking around wasn't an option anymore. An hour later, I got in my tent and laid down. Every few minutes, I would hear footsteps again. They were barely too quiet for me to tell for sure what they were though. Eventually, I got so tired that I fell asleep. Then, what I think was only an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I jolted up and grabbed my flashlight, rushing out of the tent and looking in the direction of the footsteps. I saw the bare back of them running away in the distance. My heart was beating rapidly. I looked down and saw footprints all around my tent, like they had been walking around me and searching the campsite. I tried to get the campfire going again as fast as I could so I could see better. I was terrified. I had nowhere to go and nobody to help me. I sat at the fire all night, keeping my head on a swivel, but I never saw or heard anything else. In the morning, I snapped a few pictures of the lake, then started the hike back. I had planned to stay for a whole day. I wasn't comfortable anymore, feeling like I was being followed. I was able to make it back without any more trouble, thankfully. But, along my journey, I began noticing several things missing from my backpack. Small things like food, a few tools, etc., but I always had my bag with me. Even today, I wonder if whoever had been outside my tent that one night had actually snuck inside and stole from my bag while I was asleep. Even the thought of it makes my whole body shiver. I was 16 at the time, and I lived with my single mom in an apartment. I was an only child, and my mom worked 2 jobs, so I was left home alone pretty often once I got old enough to take care of myself. I was never scared of being alone, mostly because I was in an apartment complex with a lot of other people living above and below me. On this day, my mom was working both jobs, so when she got out of her first shift at 2, she went straight to her next shift that started at 3 and ended at 11. It was summer, so I was out of school. I didn't have a car or anything, so all I could really do was walk around or stay home. I spent most of my morning watching TV and even took a short nap. At 6, I was getting hungry for dinner. We didn't have much of anything for me to eat though, so I took some cash off the counter and walked to the grocery store. It was a 40-minute walk, but at least the weather was nice. I got something small to snack on, as well as a frozen meal, then started the walk back. It was already dark out, but the whole road home was well lit and not in a dangerous area, so I wasn't worried. I'd done this plenty of times before. Halfway back though, I recognized that a man walking a ways behind me was taking all the same turns as me. I picked up the pace, but I never seemed to lose him. The final road led straight to the apartment complex, and there was nothing else down there, but he still trailed behind me. I was nervous, but also aware that it was most likely just someone else who lives in one of the apartments. I got to the entrance and went up to my room. I knew everyone who lived in my complex, or at least what they looked like, so I knew that whoever that man was couldn't get inside if he even was trying to follow me. I took my frozen meal out and started heating it up in the microwave. About a minute went by before I heard a buzz from the room below me, then from my room, and then the one above me. It was someone at the entrance door requesting to be buzzed in. This was something people would do often if they forgot their keys. They would ring all of the rooms in hopes that someone would be kind enough to buzz them in. I waited for a moment, then heard the faint sound of the entrance door unlocking and opening. Someone let them in. I walked around and put my ear against the door, listening carefully. I heard a knock at one of the rooms downstairs, then someone answered. It was extremely difficult to hear any specific words, but at one point, I could have sworn I heard my name. My heart started racing. The door downstairs closed and footsteps started coming up the stairs. They walked right up to my door and stopped. I backed away from the door and tried to be quiet. They knocked again. "Hello, your mom asked me to check up on you. Can you just answer the door and let me know you're alright, please?" Not to make this sound bad, but my mom would never randomly send someone to check up on me while she was so busy with work. This was definitely something bad. I moved to the opposite corner of the room and dialed 911. The man continued knocking and calling out for me as the police were on their way. At one point, he even started kicking the door as if trying to knock it down. I was terrified and locked myself in my room. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Officers showed up a few minutes later. The woman living in the room downstairs told the officers that the man said he was a babysitter and had asked her if she knew which room was mine. She said he knew my name and everything, so she didn't even think not to trust him. It's pretty clear though that he was probably trying to kidnap me. Unfortunately, they had no way of identifying the man, aside from the woman's description, so he was never found. It still creeps me out though, wondering how the man knew my name and that my mom wasn't home. How long had he been stalking me for? And is he still?
I've contemplated telling this story a lot lately. I'm older, and my children are now starting to drive. So it's not to be unexpected that this memory would be at the forefront of my mind now. When I was 16, I was way off track in my short life. I had dropped out of school and had no future ahead of me. I decided I needed a job. Well, my parents helped decide for me. Coming from an abusive home, it only stands to reason that my money-hungry parents would expect a 16-year-old to pay rent and utilities. So that's what I did. I got my GED and went off to find a job. The place that hired me on was a mom-and-pop store. I was working as a bagger. Yes, I had the apron and helped customers take their groceries to their cars, and I pushed carts up a long hill by the dozen every hour. Back then, that was a perfect starting place for someone who had never worked before. The pay was terrible, the hours were long, and the customers were often awful. If I wasn't being stalked by customers or assaulted, it just wasn't a regular day. I was immediately put on the third shift. This was the busiest part of the day, until it wasn't, since the store would close at 10 p.m. I was usually left alone to sweep and mop the floors then. After that, I would take out all the trash and bring in all the carts, followed by cleaning the bathrooms. The women's bathroom wasn't so bad, but the men's bathroom was usually wall-to-wall feces and trash and left me feeling like I needed a bleach bath every night. This event is still fresh in my mind as the day it happened. My supervisor came by and congratulated me on 6 months of hard work and handed me an envelope. Inside it was my paycheck and another check, a bonus of $20. At the time, I was just relieved to have enough money to get by, so I tucked that envelope in my apron and went on with my day. By the end of my shift, I was exhausted, ready for the drive home. My drive home was usually 30 minutes up hills and into the mountains. At some points, there was nothing but empty highways. There were no streetlights and very few homes. We lived in the middle of nowhere, and it was desolate. At 12 a.m., it was spooky and lonesome, but nothing to fear, or so I thought. I would stop at the last and only 24-hour gas station in town, fill up on gas, and head down the road. Usually, I'd play music loudly to keep myself awake, though sometimes the FM stations would fade in and out as my truck climbed the hills. My truck was old and the headlights barely showed the road in front of me, but it got me from point A to point B. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel as the music came back, blasting loudly as if I'd maxed out the volume. Startled, I quickly grabbed the dial and lowered the music. I shook my head. Suddenly, I saw something. In the rearview mirror in the distance, bright headlights, and they were coming up on me very fast. Not unusual to have a straggler here and there, as there were a lot of bonfire drunken parties out in the boonies. But they came up on me, and without hesitation, they bumped right into my truck. I was driving 65 miles per hour, and my truck lurched and rattled, barely staying on the road. The scream that came from my throat was of pure terror. I didn't understand. Were they drunk? What did I do? I didn't want to die, not in the middle of nowhere with this car chasing me down. It was the late 90s. Cell phones were still pretty new, but there was no service in our area. Not to mention, most of them were unaffordable for a 16-year-old bagger. So I was completely and utterly alone in the middle of nowhere. I sped up, begging my truck to go as they came up again, hitting my bumper even harder. My truck swerved all over the road, catching gravel at some point. It flew up, hitting the windshield as I returned to the road. I knew my truck could not take much more. The car swerved around me and was now driving in the left lane. Its engine roared as it passed by. It was a 1970s-style Cadillac, a green color. As it passed by, I looked. I could not see the driver or passenger through the windows. As they got ahead of me and pulled into the right lane, I could make out two figures with my dim and useless headlights. They then started braking hard, which in turn caused me to brake and swerve. This went on for what felt like an eternity before they finally sped up and disappeared over a hill. There was a brief pause, a moment where I thought maybe they were done, bored, and had taken off. As I came up over the hill, in the halo of my dim headlights was the car, now parked in the middle of the road across both lanes. I screamed again as the car doors flew open. I couldn't see anyone inside, just doors flying open. I was confused, bewildered, scared. I only had seconds to act, and instead of braking, I went off the road, barely missing a mile marker as I flew by them. I hit the brush on the side of the road hard, small branches breaking against my windshield as I drove. I soon found a break between the mile markers as I gunned the engine. I felt the truck lift off the ground for a brief moment, and I hit pavement, sparks flying as I corrected the truck and drove with the gas pedal down to the floor. Screaming and crying, I pushed that old truck as fast as it could go, and the moment I saw my turn towards home, I swerved and hit the dirt road. I sped all the way home, turning my headlights off as I knew the roads like the back of my hand. The headlights were behind me, looking for me. I rolled into my driveway and shut off the engine, rolling behind a line of trees. In the pitch black, I double-checked the locks on the doors, and I lay down in the seat. I looked at my front door, knowing how many steps it was, and wondering if I'd be fast enough to make it inside. I soon saw headlights, and I held my breath, trying to control my sobbing. I knew that I was hidden behind this line of trees, but in my mind, I just knew they were going to find me. As the car rolled by, I ducked my head down and put my hand over my mouth, resisting the urge to scream in fear. The taillights hit up the night as the car rolled by and continued on. I waited, shaking and sobbing, fearful they would come back. I lay in the seat, not moving for what seemed like forever. Eventually, I sat up slowly. I looked around and decided to run for it. I unlocked the door and took off running. I stumbled and grabbed the railing of the stairs, climbing to the door. I jammed my key into the lock and I swung the door open, jumping inside quickly and locking the door as I cried. Of course, my parents insisted I was making this all up. Then they also wanted me to go to the police, which the police couldn't do much. The only proof I had was the damage to the truck, which they said could possibly just be my fault. I went back to work because I had no choice. I was terrified, looking at all the cars around me for months. To this day, I still wonder if they were after my paycheck. How long had they been watching me? What would have happened if I had stopped instead of swerving around their car? Why didn't I see anyone inside when those doors flew open? Where were the people? I'll never know for sure.
This happened last year. I was shopping at my local Walmart, just doing some typical shopping on a random weeknight. The store was pretty quiet, and it was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. I had been in the store for about 15 minutes or so, and I was in the aisle where they have the fitness items. I was looking at one of those massage guns. I wasn't planning on buying one that day, or even buying one at Walmart, but I had been considering getting one. When I walked by, I noticed it and stopped to read the box. I was in the aisle looking at it for a few minutes, and when I was doing so, I remember hearing some voices in the next aisle over. It happened to be a toy aisle, and this was at sort of the back corner of the store. I heard a man's voice, and then the voice of a child. At first, I paid no attention as I was looking, but soon I heard the man say, "I will buy you this toy if you come with me." I assumed it was the child's father at first, but I didn't really know why he would say that. I couldn't really make out what the kid said back to him, but I heard the man then say something like, "Your mom said it's okay." Then, I just had the crazy thought that maybe this wasn't the child's father. The man started saying, "Come on, let's go," a couple of times. I heard him starting to walk to the end of the aisle. I just had a really bad feeling about it. At the time, I didn't know if I was just being nosy or if I should do something. I decided to walk by the aisle and glance down it to see. I left the aisle that I was in and walked into the next one over, which was a toy aisle. And when I looked down, I saw a man wearing a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little kid and leading her to the other end of the aisle. Their backs were facing me. I was kind of thinking on the fly, and I said, "Excuse me," to the guy. He turned around and looked really surprised. I picked up some random toy from the shelf. It was some type of stuffed animal. I said I wanted to ask the man a question, if this would be a good gift for my niece. I then started walking over to them. He said he had no idea, and I said I thought he might know. I then asked if that was his daughter. He said no, and he was just watching her for the moment, but then said they really had to get going. Him and the child then walked away. I really wasn't sure if I should believe him or not. Maybe I was making too much of it. I realized it probably was a reasonable explanation, and I turned and started to walk into the opposite direction. I was telling myself that nothing was wrong, and I was just paranoid. But I'm not even kidding. About 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice calling out a name. For this story, let's just say the name was Sarah. The woman was calling out Sarah, not really loud, but enough for people in the aisles nearby to hear, including me. I walked towards the voice and found the woman a few aisles down and more towards the center of the store. When I reached her, I asked if Sarah was her daughter. She looked concerned and said yes. I had a terrible feeling, and I said that I might have seen her daughter with a man and I thought they might be leaving. We both started sprinting towards the front of the store. The good thing is that this was probably less than a minute since I had seen the man. When we made it to the front of the store, we saw the man and the child at the self-checkouts area. He was buying one of the toys for her. The girl's mother started shouting, and the man claimed he was just trying to be nice and buy the toy for the girl, but he quickly tried to run away after realizing nobody would believe that. He ran out the door and was able to momentarily get away. I was just happy that the girl was okay and back with her mother. It turned out that the girl had wandered off from her mother to look at toys while her mom was shopping in another area of the store. The mother had believed that her child was nearby, but had actually wandered off much further. I also found out that the guy was located not long after this at all.
It It was just past 11 p.m., and I was in the back room of our building, moving boxes around. It was just a regular hardware store, and I was an overnight stalker there. My other coworker that I usually work with was on vacation, so it was just me for the night. I didn't mind though, because people always expect less from you when you're left alone to do all the work, so if anything didn't get done, it wouldn't really matter. I was working slowly, taking my time. All of the deliveries that came in during the day needed to be put by the aisles where they belonged, so I was just breaking down the pallets and putting boxes on carts that I would then roll into the main shopping area and stock the boxes from there. Once I had filled a few carts, I grabbed one and pushed it to the aisle on the far left. It was raining, or maybe even storming, pretty heavily outside, though through the rain, I thought I heard something from the front of the building. I didn't really care, not even crossing my mind for a second that it was anything other than the building making noises. I took a few boxes and started stocking, humming to myself to save me from the boredom. But then again, I thought I heard something. I walked down to the front of the store and looked all the way at the other end where the front door was. There didn't seem to be anything or anyone. I stayed there for a little bit, again, in no rush to work, and then it happened again. I could have sworn this time that I saw something moving by the front door, and that was where the sounds seemed to come from. Being in my place of work, with all the doors locked, I wasn't really afraid of anything, but more just wanted to make sure nothing strange was going on outside. I went up to the front door and looked out the glass, which I noticed had huge smudges and scratches on them. Nothing was outside, no cars or people, just heavy rain pouring down. I turned and started walking away, back to where I was working. It was quiet for a while, maybe a whole hour even, but then the sound came again from the front door. I dropped what I was doing immediately and walked back to the front, and from across the store, I could for sure make out a figure moving around outside the door. I began walking closer before the figure stopped, stood still for a second, then ran away. I ran up to the door, trying to catch a glimpse of the person, but it was too dark and rainy. Looking at the door though, there were definitely more marks on it than there was before. I was confident that this person was trying to break in. I pulled out my phone, still standing by the door, and called the police. The operator said it wouldn't be too long, just a few minutes. I put my phone back in my pocket and waited by the door. Looking around, the parking lot was still empty, but then I turned my head to look against the building, and on the very side was that same figure. I backed away quickly, worried that he may have seen me. I took several steps back and tried to be quiet. Not even 10 seconds later, the figure appeared right outside the door. While the glass was somewhat foggy and had raindrops all over it, I could tell he was looking at me. He slammed something against the window. It looked like maybe a large rock. Then he hit it again and again, trying to break the glass. I backed away quicker and ran to the back of the store, locking myself in the office. Through the building, I heard the glass shatter and the alarm by the door go off. I waited in fear, hearing nothing else. A few minutes of silence passed, and I was growing more and more nervous, until the police finally showed up. I heard them call out, then walk around searching the place before they got to the office, where I identified myself and told them what I knew. The guy wasn't in the store, so I guess after he broke the glass, he just left. It seems really weird and doesn't make any sense. Part of me even wishes that he had actually stolen something so that I'd at least know that that was what he was after. But given he didn't do anything after breaking down the door, I don't know what he wanted, and that is what still scares me to this day. My family owns some cabins in Oregon that all of us like to stay in sometimes, or have family get-togethers there, but for this trip, I was going solo. I had just turned 20 and I'd never been camping alone, and I figured camping somewhere near the cabins would be perfect in case something were to happen. I drove an hour there, then walked 30 minutes down a trail that led to the cabin I would be staying by. As I walked up to it, I noticed one of the windows was missing. There was no glass on the ground. It looked like the entire window had just been taken out, which was a very unexpected thing to see. I didn't plan on entering the cabin, but I had brought the key for emergencies, and this felt like something I should investigate. But I was even more confused when the door opened without me unlocking it. I walked in, and right away it was obvious that the place had been broken into. There were muddy footprints all over the floors, and some more expensive stuff was missing. It was unfortunate to see, but there was no way of knowing how long ago it all happened. From what I knew, it had been months since anyone was at the cabins, and even then, they may not have even come to this cabin. I tried to lock up the place as best I could and set out to find a spot to camp. I had no service, but I didn't feel it was absolutely necessary to let my family know right away, or even to call the police yet. I walked 30 minutes down the hill from the cabin and found a flat enough spot to set up. Rain started pouring down, and being new to this, it took me a couple hours to get everything set up the right way. Already being soaked, I sat outside on a nearby log under a tree and started eating some prepackaged food, when out of nowhere, I started hearing someone talking. I immediately spotted a man walking behind me. He was drenched, walking up the hill toward the direction of the cabin, and didn't seem to have noticed me. The way he was speaking was really weird because it made no sense, and he was obviously talking to himself. Soon, he walked out of sight, but something about seeing that gave me chills. An hour went by, and I took a quick hike back up to the cabin to see if he was maybe staying there, but from afar, it still looked empty, so I went back. Once it was night, I used a fire kit to start a small campfire and used it to heat up some of my food. The rain made it difficult, but once the fire was going, it stayed up pretty well. Not long into it, I heard footsteps coming from up the hill. I stared at the trees, seeing nothing but pitch black beyond the reach of my campfire. They continued walking until a man came into sight. I couldn't see much of him, but he looked similar to the man I'd seen earlier.
"Hey, what do you want?"
I yelled, trying to scare him off. He stopped and stared at me with a blank face, having rain dripping from his head as he just stood there. I yelled again, but he didn't move. We were standing just 10 feet from each other, and every second made me more and more scared of what was about to happen. Then, through the rain, I heard the sound of a single footstep behind me. I instantly sprinted to the side of the hill and didn't stop until my legs gave out under me. I don't think they chased me, but with the rain and wind, it was too hard for me to hear while running. I found my way up the hill and walked the rest of the way to my car in the rain with only my phone light. Once I got in range, I called 911. In the days following, a team was sent out to investigate the cabin and my campsite. My campsite was gone, left with only a few useless pieces of equipment, but in the cabin, they identified 3 unique shoe prints on the floor. It had me shaking for weeks, knowing that there were 3 unknown men out there, hiding not far away. Nothing else was found, and it was all said to most likely just be a robbery because they didn't chase me, but who knows what they would have done to me if I had stayed there.
So, way back when the PS3 first came out, I really wanted one. I mean, I wanted one bad. The main reason was because I wanted to play Call of Duty 3, which is still my favorite game series ever. But since my idiot self was slow on pre-ordering one, I was SOL when it came to the actual release date. I remember watching eBay like a hawk, scouring Craigslist every day, and day after day went by and I didn't have any luck at all. But then boom, I see this one post on Craigslist that said a guy was selling his brand new PlayStation 3, Call of Duty 3 included, and he's selling both of them for like $400, at least $100 below asking price. Only thing was, he needed to sell it ASAP, and he needed someone to drive over to him to pick it up. Person that could pay his asking price and pick up ASAP got the package. Somehow, I got lucky, real lucky, and a lot of folks were messaging him for it and sounded like they were going to rob him. I was older than most of the wannabe buyers. I could text him a picture of the cash and I could drive over to the Walmart parking lot that night to be able to pick it up. And I felt like a kid at Christmas. Granted that most kids don't drive to Santa to pay him $400 to get their presents, but still, I was majorly excited to pick it up. Only trouble was, the guy was working late that night, so I'd have to drive over to the Walmart parking lot at like 2 in the morning so I could pick it up. I know what you're thinking. Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. Something bad was always going to happen. And yeah, I'd be lying if I said it hadn't passed my mind when I was thinking about the whole thing. I think I made myself clear at the beginning though. I wanted that stupid World War II game, and the amount I wanted it outweighed whatever good sense I had. So, that's how I ended up in the Walmart parking lot in South Hanover, way after dark. Like I said, there was always a chance something bad was going to happen. I just figured it'd be from the other end of the law. I'm just sitting there, lacking, when I heard someone tapping on the glass in my driver's side window, and I saw the gun. I thought I was getting carjacked or something. They got me out of the car at gunpoint, but then when I saw the badge on the dude in plain clothes belt, I honestly breathed a sigh of relief at first. I knew my reason for being there sounded sketchy. Picking up a PlayStation 3 at 2 in the morning would have sounded really sus if I was a cop. But then when they pulled the $400 in cash out of my wallet and said that they were confiscating it as suspected earnings for drugs, I started to get real angry. I told them to search my car for drugs or guns or whatever they were looking for. If they didn't find anything, they had no right to take my money. One of the cops smirks when I said that though, screaming up in my face and threatening to smack me. His partner had to calm him down like he was legitimately worried that he was about to punch me. The angry cop walks back to their unmarked car and the other cop writes up a ticket for the cash they took. And while he does that, he apologizes for his partner and promises if I bring some pay stubs to the precinct, I'll get all my money back, no problems. I'm angry. I'm probably going to miss out on the PlayStation, but I figured the guys are just doing their jobs and getting it taken by them was much better than getting straight up robbed and carjacked by dudes that wouldn't have been so reluctant to beat me down. Because I figured I could still get my hands on the PlayStation, I drove over to the precinct first thing in the morning with some pay stubs, which I figured would prove the money was mine. I get there, hand in my ticket, and some cop walks out with an evidence bag with my money in it. Only right as she puts it down in front of me, I tell her there must be some kind of mistake. I tell her the cops pulled me out of my car and took exactly $400 off of me, but in the bag, there was no more than $100. She then shows me the ticket, and in the little box that listed confiscated items, it says $100 instead of $400. Right then, it was my turn to freak out. Like I couldn't believe that they do me like that. I started demanding complaint forms, numbers to call, all of that. The lady just thought that I was sizing up the amount, but I swear to God I had more money than that. So she gives me the number to call to register a complaint, which I do. I know. Cops taking bribes around Baltimore is probably only raising eyebrows with the most naive of you, but missing out on the PS3 wasn't the scary thing. The scary thing was coming home from work 3 days later and seeing a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. I didn't immediately assume anything bad. I just wondered who in the neighborhood got themselves a new set of wheels. That's when I see him, the same plainclothes cop that wanted to tee off on me that night, the same cop who took my money. He just looks at me, dead in the eyes, and smiles before driving off down the block. It was just like a warning or something, just to tell me he knew I made the complaint. If criminals or gangsters do stuff, it shakes you up, sure, but it makes sense. Those Johns are supposed to rob you or shoot you or whatever. But when it's the cops doing it, the same people who's supposed to protect you, who are you supposed to turn to?
I babysit as a part-time job. I worked for a few different sites before I settled for Sitter City. This specific babysitting site allowed me to work the random hours that I wanted and not have to worry about being able to babysit on a set schedule every week. On a Saturday morning, I got a job from a family requesting me to babysit their 2 kids from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. I worked mid-shift at my regular job that day, so this still worked for my schedule. Also, these late-night jobs are always the best because the kids usually go to bed between 9 and 10, so I'm left to just relax until the parents get home. I accepted the job, and that night I drove over and met the parents 10 minutes early. They introduced the kids, who were both very young boys, I think 5 and 6 years old. They told me to just make sure that they were in bed by 9:30, then they left. The 2 boys were both pretty shy and watched cartoons for most of the time. I'd say half of the kids I meet are just like this though. At 9:30, I turned off the TV and got them in bed without any problems, then went downstairs and sat on the couch. I had 3.5 hours to myself before the parents got back. I brought headphones to prepare for this, and put them in and started watching YouTube on my phone. I was tired, so I needed something to keep me busy so that I wouldn't fall asleep. Like I said, these late jobs are the best because it doesn't feel like you're even babysitting, but the hardest part of it is not falling asleep. By 11, I was really pushing myself to keep my eyes open. Watching videos on my phone was starting to make me even more sleepy, so I put my phone down and got up. I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a cup of water, then stood by the table while I sipped on it, hoping to wake myself up some more. Then I heard a voice. It was one of the boys upstairs calling for me. I put my water down and walked quickly up the stairs and into his room. It was the older of the 2. He was sitting up in his bed and looked really scared.
You okay?
I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. He said in between his cries that he heard someone walking outside his room. I told him that it was okay and that nobody else was here, then tucked him back in. The other boy was in bed on the other side of the room, sleeping still, so I backed out of the room and closed the door quietly. I stuck my head into each of the rooms upstairs, making sure they were empty, then went back downstairs. I was sure the boy just had a nightmare. I got my cup of water and sat on the couch again. I was more awake now, so I guess that was a good thing. But then I heard it. Someone walking through the hallway upstairs. It sounded slow and careful, like they were trying to be quiet. I was terrified, but I had to keep the boys safe. I ran upstairs, but nobody was in the hallway. Then I opened the boys' room, and both of them were still asleep. I checked each of the rooms again, then went back downstairs. I was tired, and figured my mind was playing tricks on me. This time I took my phone out to keep me busy. Maybe a minute passed, when suddenly there were footsteps sprinting down the hallway upstairs. I ran upstairs, seeing nobody again, but this time, when I opened the boys' room, they were both sitting up in bed, looking terrified. I got both of them downstairs and into my car outside. I locked the car doors, then called the police and the parents. Both of the boys said they heard running footsteps outside their door, so I knew I wasn't just hearing things. When police came, they searched everywhere, but found no one. They didn't even find any signs of someone ever having broken in or staying anywhere inside. I don't know who or what we heard, but I know there was someone else upstairs. Needless to say, I never went back to their house to babysit. Every year, my town has a Halloween fair that opens up during the last week of October. It's basically just a bunch of Halloween-themed attractions like haunted houses and scary corn mazes. My friends and I like to go there before we started trick-or-treating, just to get us into the Halloween mood. So just like every other year, we met up there around 5. It was pretty busy, which is expected on Halloween, but basically every attraction had a really long line that was not worth waiting in. We looked around for a bit, then realized that the only thing with a short line was the corn maze. Something always made me feel weird about being in a corn maze. I think it was the fact that you kind of always feel lost and lose a sense of direction after a while. Anyways, we waited in line for a few minutes, then entered the maze. They had a bunch of creepy scarecrows and other props set up, which definitely made it more enjoyable than a regular corn maze. But after about 10 minutes, it got a little boring, and it felt as though we were just walking in circles. At one point, we crossed paths with some older guy in a scarecrow costume, who just kind of walked past us without saying anything. And then a few minutes later, we crossed paths again. I thought it was part of the attraction at first, but I also thought it was weird that he didn't actually try to scare us. Then again, it would also be weird for a grown man to be walking around alone in a corn maze, too. Another 10 minutes went by before we finally found our way out. We checked one more time to see how long the other lines were, but ended up just leaving as we didn't want to miss out on trick-or-treating for standing in a line all night. The fair was in the center of my neighborhood, so it made it easy to just cross a couple of streets and then start going house to house for candy. We'd gone to probably 20 houses and had made our way down a whole street before one of my friends in the group stopped us as we were walking down the sidewalk. Isn't that the guy from the corn maze? We looked up and towards where he was looking. Sure enough, the man in the scarecrow costume was standing on the other side of the street from us. He wasn't looking at us though. He was staring at the house that he was standing next to. We all thought it was pretty weird, and knew now that the guy was definitely not working for the fair. We skipped the next few houses to get some distance from the man, just in case. Then we continued our trick-or-treating as usual. Only a couple minutes later, we all saw the creepy scarecrow guy on the same side of the road as us, and walking towards us this time. He was only a few houses down from us, and by now we definitely knew that there was something wrong with this guy. We walked quickly down to the next intersection and turned left. From there, we ran as fast as we could to get to the next turn and made a right, hoping that he wouldn't have been able to see where we went. By now, we were all a little freaked out and really had no idea what this guy was trying to do, but it was definitely creepy. One of my friend's houses was just up ahead though, so we figured we could stay there for half an hour to make sure that he was gone, and then we could head back out. I'd say we were inside for 10 minutes before we heard a soft rustling sound coming from outside one of the windows in the room that we were in. We all looked at each other, terrified of what we'd see if we moved the curtain from the window. But then I got up slowly and made my way over, and I peeked behind the curtain. The man was standing just a few feet from the house, staring at the window with something in his hand. It looked like a hammer or a crowbar, but I backed away too quickly to fully comprehend what I saw. My friends knew exactly what the situation was, and we called 911 to report the guy for following us. Then my friend called his parents to let them know what was going on. It took a whole 5 minutes for the police to arrive, and during that time we didn't hear or see anything else. But as soon as the sirens were nearby, we all heard footsteps running away from the backyard. When the cops came up to the door, we explained in more detail what was going on, and they actually told us that there were multiple other reports of the guy in a scarecrow costume harassing people at the fair. We decided to just hang out at the house for the rest of the night, which really sucked because it kind of ruined our Halloween. But we all still had the feeling that that guy was somewhere not far, watching and waiting for us. I was 16 at the time, and I lived with my single mom in an apartment. I was an only child, and my mom worked 2 jobs, so I was left home alone pretty often once I got old enough to take care of myself. I was never scared of being alone, mostly because I was in an apartment complex with a lot of other people living above and below me. On this day, my mom was working both jobs, so when she got out of her first shift at 2, she went straight to her next shift that started at 3 and ended at 11. It was summer, so I was out of school. I didn't have a car or anything, so all I could really do was walk around or stay home. I spent most of my morning watching TV and even took a short nap. At 6, I was getting hungry for dinner. We didn't have much of anything for me to eat though, so I took some cash off the counter and walked to the grocery store. It was a 40-minute walk, but at least the weather was nice. I got something small to snack on, as well as a frozen meal, then started the walk back. It was already dark out, but the whole road home was well lit and not in a dangerous area, so I wasn't worried. I'd done this plenty of times before. Halfway back though, I recognized that a man walking a ways behind me was taking all the same turns as me. I picked up the pace, but I never seemed to lose him. The final road led straight to the apartment complex, and there was nothing else down there, but he still trailed behind me. I was nervous, but also aware that it was most likely just someone else who lives in one of the apartments. I got to the entrance and went up to my room. I knew everyone who lived in my complex, or at least what they looked like, so I knew that whoever that man was couldn't get inside if he even was trying to follow me. I took my frozen meal out and started heating it up in the microwave. About a minute went by before I heard a buzz from the room below me, then from my room, and then the one above me. It was someone at the entrance door requesting to be buzzed in. This was something people would do often if they forgot their keys. They would ring all of the rooms in hopes that someone would be kind enough to buzz them in. I waited for a moment, then heard the faint sound of the entrance door unlocking and opening. Someone let them in. I walked around and put my ear against the door, listening carefully. I heard a knock at one of the rooms downstairs, then someone answered. It was extremely difficult to hear any specific words, but at one point, I could have sworn I heard my name. My heart started racing. The door downstairs closed and footsteps started coming up the stairs. They walked right up to my door and stopped. I backed away from the door and tried to be quiet. They knocked again.
Hello, your mom asked me to check up on you. Can you just answer the door and let me know you're alright, please?
Not to make this sound bad, but my mom would never randomly send someone to check up on me while she was so busy with work. This was definitely something bad. I moved to the opposite corner of the room and dialed 911. The man continued knocking and calling out for me as the police were on their way. At one point, he even started kicking the door as if trying to knock it down. I was terrified and locked myself in my room. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Officers showed up a few minutes later. The woman living in the room downstairs told the officers that the man said he was a babysitter and had asked her if she knew which room was mine. She said he knew my name and everything, so she didn't even think not to trust him. It's pretty clear though that he was probably trying to kidnap me. Unfortunately, they had no way of identifying the man, aside from the woman's description, so he was never found. It still creeps me out though, wondering how the man knew my name and that my mom wasn't home. How long had he been stalking me for? And is he still? Me and one of my good friends, I'll call him Jesse, would go on camping trips once or twice a year. We used to more when we were roommates in college, but we both work full-time now. Jesse was the one who actually got me into camping, having done it his whole life. I hadn't even been camping once before I met him. This happened 2 years ago, on one of our yearly camping trips that we went on in the summer. To specify, we didn't go far out or anything. We basically went down a trail, maybe 2 hours out, then set up our tents and everything. The whole point of it was to camp, not to hike. and usually for around 4 to 5 days. When we got to a good spot, Jesse and I put everything together and relaxed. The next 3 days were just as you'd expect. We sat at the campfire and had some drinks and just talked. We went for some walks and played some board games as well, but to sum it all up, we really just relaxed. I mean, that was the whole point of it anyway. On the 4th day, we agreed to wrap it up and head back the next morning. As the sun was starting to set, we prepared to get the campfire going again. Jesse said he'd go for a short walk and collect some dry sticks, and he asked me to get the food out and prep it for cooking. I did as he said, but as the sun faded out, Jesse still wasn't back. It had been maybe 30 minutes, which wasn't a long time for a walk, but it was a long time to be collecting sticks. I figured he must have meant he was going for a walk just to walk, and not necessarily for the sticks. I waited another 30 minutes. The sun was now fully set, and it was getting really dark. I had turned on our heavy lamp for a light source, but I knew it would run out of batteries if I left it on too long. I was getting really worried about Jesse. He was the one who was experienced in everything, so it just didn't make sense for him to get lost like this. I figured it best to at least start the fire so that if he was lost, maybe he'd see the flame and find his way back. I took the lamp and collected a bundle of sticks and started the fire with some matches. By the 2-hour mark, I was really losing it. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to decide between looking for him or going back and calling for help, or just staying put. Every scenario was running through my head. What if he'd gotten hurt and wasn't far away? Then looking for him would make sense. But if he was far away, then me getting lost would only burden everything more. 2 hours and 30 minutes after I'd last seen Jesse, and 2 hours after nightfall, I heard a gunshot. It was far off, somewhat in the direction Jesse went in, but what really scared me about it was that neither of us had brought a gun. I stood up and paced around the campsite for a minute before grabbing the lamp and going out to try and find him. It didn't take long before I heard steady footsteps running toward me. My hand was trembling, holding up the lamp, but the light only reached a few feet ahead. I saw a figure getting closer, and I barely recognized them to be Jesse. His eyes were wide open, and he looked horrified. I'd never seen anyone's expression be that visibly scared before. He told me in a sharp, hushed voice that we needed to leave right now. We ran back to the camp and got our backpacks, but left the rest behind. I questioned him, but he refused to answer until we made it out of the woods. He said someone else was there and approached him on his walk. They held him at gunpoint, making him be quiet and follow them somewhere. Before they reached wherever it was they were taking him, Jesse tried for his escape, and that's when I found him running. That's all he told me, and ever has told me every time I ask. I can tell he's purposefully leaving out some important details, but he still refuses to share them. One he specifically leaves out is the gunshot. He never mentioned it. Personally, I know Jesse is a capable guy, and it wouldn't be far off to assume he tried to overpower the man holding him up. Maybe he got the gun away from him and did what he had to do to escape. It would explain Jesse's traumatized state and why the man didn't chase him. I don't know what happened back there, but ever since, Jesse hasn't wanted to go camping again. Honestly, neither do I, but I just wish I could know the truth about what went down that night. I tried buying a truck off of Craigslist some years ago, and before you say anything, it was a great price and I wasn't in the best financial situation. I'd never actually used Craigslist before, but I knew it was an average place for people to sell their stuff, which meant that it was usually cheap. Even with the cheap prices of cars on the site, I still had to ask my dad for money because I didn't even have the few $1,000s in my account that I needed in cash for a cheap car. After a bit of scrolling though, I messaged this guy who posted his truck for $4,000 and he got back pretty quickly, answering all of my questions on it and giving what sounded like honest answers. He basically said that it wasn't the nicest looking, but it'll get you where you gotta be in a reliable manner. Interested, he agreed to meet me at a Burger King that was a halfway point of where we both lived. I got there first, taking an Uber, and he showed up maybe 5 minutes later. We chatted for a bit, and he told me more about the truck, mentioning minor issues it's given him in the past, but nothing too serious. After all, I didn't have the money to be picky. Of course, I asked if I could test drive it, to which he said that he knew a less busy parking lot and I could test drive it there. Honestly, I was like, alright, whatever, and I took my phone out to get a quick Uber, but he said it was just across the street and that we could just ride together. I didn't want to be rude and had never done something like this before, so I kind of assumed it was a normal thing. Looking back, I should have told him to F off, but I was young and he was old, so for some reason I trusted him. As I got inside, he asked me if I had my license on me, which was just another reason I trusted him. He seemed like he was a genuine guy. He started driving, though we went a little further than across the street, probably a few blocks away from the Burger King, to this empty parking lot away from the main road, which was the first red flag to come up, even though it should have been the second or third.
Alright, let's switch,
he said, putting the car in park. As we were passing each other around the car, he threw me the keys, saying heads up, but they landed nowhere near me. I mean, I would have had to dive into the concrete to catch them. Awkwardly, I went to pick them up, and just as I bent down, I felt the weight of his foot slam against my side, and before I knew it, he was on top of me, ripping my wallet out of my back pocket and running back towards the truck. I immediately grabbed the keys from the ground, thinking he must have forgotten them in the heat of the moment, and that I could possibly force a trade. Unfortunately though, the keys he threw at me must have just been fake, because he just drove away, leaving me stranded there stupidly. What makes everything worse is that it all happened so fast I couldn't even get the damn license plate. I still had my phone though, and the first thing I did was cancel the only card I had because I couldn't risk him spending money I didn't have, and then I called the police. I walked back to the Burger King and filed a report when they met me there, but with only the description of a rusty white truck and an average middle-aged white guy, nothing ever came of it. He took the ad down, and his email wasn't even a real name. Apparently it was just named after a video game character, and again, I didn't get his plates. So all in all, I lost $4,000 of straight cash, had to wait for a new card in the mail, had to get a new license, and they didn't even catch the guy. Moral of the story is, don't use Craigslist, and don't be as stupid as I was. I was driving for DoorDash on the weekend to make some extra money. I worked a day job, so I could only start driving later in the night. When I started, it was a little past 9. I got my first order and dropped it off, then drove back to where the restaurants were. I drove in circles for a while, maybe 10 minutes without getting a single order. It was late, but on the weekends there would usually still be a decent amount of orders. Finally one popped up and I accepted it, though it was a small order with a small tip. After that one, I waited in a parking lot for almost 20 minutes before the next order came through. Obviously, this wasn't ideal, having to wait so long between orders and not even getting to choose which orders to accept, unless I wanted to wait even longer. This order was another small one, but some money was better than none, so I accepted it. I picked up their bag from Taco Bell and counted the items to make sure it was right. 2 tacos and some packets of hot sauce. That was it. The delivery fee was probably more expensive than the food. I confirmed that I picked up the order, then got the directions to the house. It was 10 minutes away in some regular neighborhood. A few minutes into the drive, I pulled up to a red light. There was almost nobody on the road at this time of night, so I was just sitting at this empty intersection, waiting for it to turn green, when a truck pulled up next to me. I unconsciously looked over slightly, but the man in the truck caught my attention enough to make me turn my head fully. He was sticking his head out of the window and looking down into my car. Not at me, but at my passenger seat, which had the DoorDash bag in it. I looked back and saw the light was green, so I pressed on the gas. I had no idea why he was looking in my car, but he made it very obvious and didn't even try to hide it. I checked my mirrors, and the truck was now in my lane, cruising a good distance behind me. As I continued driving along my route, the truck stayed behind me, but I couldn't say for sure if he was following me or not, because the route was straight all the way until the neighborhood. When I turned in, I stared at my mirrors, waiting anxiously for the truck to pass the entrance, but after 10 seconds, he turned in behind me. There was a chance he just lived here, and I knew that, but after seeing him looking in my car, I felt like I was justified in my suspicions. The route had me go down a few turns in the neighborhood before taking me down to the last road with the address on it. I turned, and right away I saw the dead end sign a few houses down. I braked and pulled over, staring at my rearview mirror. The truck pulled in behind me and parked. As I waited in my car, trying to come up with a plan, the truck behind me was just sitting there with its headlights on. Then I got a text. It was from the DoorDash customer, asking when the delivery would be arriving. This was all coming together, and I realized that the man in the truck, likely my customer, was waiting for me to get out of my car. Even though I knew what was going on, I still had no way of getting out of it. After a minute of me panicking to figure an escape, the man got out of his truck. He walked down to my car, but stopped right by the trunk. I watched in my mirror as he stood there, looking at me through the back windshield. It was a tense moment, making my head panic with thoughts. Then all of a sudden, he slammed something into the windshield, shattering it. I put the car in drive and floored it, just as the man jumped onto the back and tried to crawl in through the broken glass. He fell off as I made a tight U-turn, and with the time it took for him to get up, I was able to carefully maneuver between his truck without any more damage. I saw him wobble across the street as I left and called 911. When police got there, all they found were the broken shards of glass laying in the road. I'm very thankful to have made it out with nothing but a broken windshield, but that night had me shaken up for months. I just hope he's not out there trying to trap more people and do who knows what to them. I'd been a babysitter for years, working with several different companies and hundreds of families. This was just another job on a Thursday night. I drove to the house, getting there exactly on time, and met the parents. They were having a date night at a concert downtown and would be gone for 5 to 6 hours. It was 6:30 already, so this was a late job. They introduced me to their son, Jay, who was 10. He was very talkative and seemed to enjoy my company. When the parents left, he was excited to show me his video games and have me be his audience while he played. He played for around 2 hours before I started getting hungry. I let him continue playing in the living room while I made something to eat in the kitchen. I spent maybe 5 minutes heating up a meal, but then all of a sudden, when I got back, Jay was different. He wasn't talking anymore, and he seemed really shy. I tried starting up conversations, but he would barely respond. I had no idea what happened. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just nodded. I didn't want to be bothering him about it too much, so I pretended like nothing was wrong and watched him play some more. Once 9:30 came around, I told him it was time for bed and made sure he got ready. He was still acting weird, trying to avoid me and delay going to bed for as long as possible. Finally, just before 10, he got in bed. I went downstairs and sat on the couch. I was replaying the whole night in my head, wondering what went wrong, but there really didn't seem to be anything I did. I left him alone for a few minutes while I made food, and then it was like he just flipped a switch. While I was thinking on the couch, I heard Jay upstairs. He was walking down the hallway and then opened a door. I quickly went upstairs to see what he was doing, but he wasn't in the hallway. I opened the door to his room, and there he was, sitting in his bed just as I left him.
What are you doing, Jay?
I asked nicely. He looked scared of me. After no response, I just decided to let it go and began walking out the door, but then he said to me he had to use the bathroom. I said okay and let him go down the hall, but while he was in there, I took a look around his room. It all looked like an ordinary 10-year-old boy's room. Just as I was walking out, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I looked over, and right by the closet, I could see someone's eye looking back at me through the crack in the door. I hesitated, then walked out of the room and closed the door. I listened and didn't hear any movement in the room. As soon as Jay came out of the bathroom, I told him to be quiet and rushed him downstairs and into my car. I dialed 911, and as we waited for them to show up, I asked Jay if he knew someone else was in the house. He was quiet, not responding to me at all. When the first officer came, he went right inside and caught the man walking around upstairs. He looked like a 30-year-old creep. When questioned, the man said he was a friend of Jay's and that Jay even let him in the house to babysit for the night. Strangely, when the parents got home, they basically pushed me away and didn't give me any more updates on what happened. There was obviously something really weird going on, because Jay was very scared of him. I don't know if they knew each other or if this was a first-time encounter, but I hope it was all dealt with well by the police.
Halloween has always been one of my favorite holidays ever since I was a kid. I just enjoy the whole idea of spooky season and watching horror movies and everything. Anyways, this happened last year when I was 22 and lived in a small one-story home with my roommate Alex. It was Halloween night, around 9 p.m., and all the kids had pretty much finished trick-or-treating, so I put the candy away and turned off all the lights. Then we both sat down to watch some horror movies. We finished the whole movie, and I had Alex find us another one to watch while I went into the kitchen to grab some snacks. On my way into the kitchen, I thought I saw something move by the sliding glass door that led into the backyard. It startled me for a second, and I walked closer to the door, but I didn't see anything else. So I checked to make sure it was locked, and then I went to grab a bag of popcorn and made my way back to the couch. Just as Alex started the movie, we both heard a thud from the backyard. We looked at each other, then both went to the kitchen and over to the back door. I turned on the back porch light, and then slid the door open and peeked my head out. Our yard was small, and it had a fence around it, so it would have been pretty easy to see if someone was there, but I didn't see anything. We both just assumed it must have been a neighbor, and I closed the door and we continued the movie. At some point midway through, Alex got up to grab some water, and a few seconds later I heard him whisper to me from the other room, "Dude, someone's here." I could hear the genuine fear in his voice, and I immediately got a little scared too. I made my way over to him and asked what he saw, and he told me that as soon as he came into the kitchen, he saw a man run past the sliding door from outside. Although still creeped out, I told him it had to be just some stupid Halloween prank. I think part of me was just saying that to try and make myself feel better too, but it didn't work for very long. Only moments later, the front doorbell rang. I led the way, and Alex followed behind me as I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. I saw a man in a white mask and dark clothing standing on the porch. I could see he was holding a pillowcase too, and it looked pretty full, as if he had a bunch of candy in it. He was just staring at the door, not even moving or looking around. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I let Alex look, and then we both decided to just ignore him and see if he leaves. We waited for a few minutes on the couch, pretty much just sitting in silence, trying to listen for anything. Then I got up and looked again, and the man was gone, but he left his pillowcase on the porch, still full. "Let's just call the cops. Something doesn't feel right about this." I agreed with him, and we went over to get my phone from the couch, but as I walked through the hallway, I saw the man standing with his mask against the sliding door in our backyard. I yelled for Alex, and we both ran to my bedroom and locked ourselves in. Alex pulled his phone out and called 911, while I moved a dresser in front of the door just in case. We were both freaking out, and I didn't want to take any risks. Only moments later, the guy started banging on our window, and I could hear him trying to open it from the outside. We had only lived there for a few months, and I honestly had no idea if the windows were even locked or not, as neither of us have ever touched them. Alex pulled the curtain back, and the man ran away. Luckily, the windows were locked. We waited in my room for almost 15 minutes before the police showed up. The man had already run off, I guess, but when we let the cops in, we noticed the pillowcase was still on the porch. One of the officers slowly opened it and checked inside. Then he grabbed it and poured it out. It was just a bunch of leaves and small sticks. The officer guessed that it was probably just some trick to try and get us to open the door so he could force his way in. With nothing really to go off of, though, they ended up leaving after taking a quick look around and not seeing anything. We were still shaken by the incident, but nothing else happened the rest of the night or any day afterwards. We still ended up moving out a few months later, though, as we didn't feel very safe in the house after that incident.
I'm not sure if I should tell this story, but I've held it in for years. But because it sounds crazy, I was told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful, and we were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that were not far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back and had dinner. It was all very normal, until we woke up the next day. First, I need to give some context as to how we slept that night, so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler and stereo into the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent, with a gun next to him. When we awoke next morning, I felt fine. I'd slept hard, and from inside the tent, everything seemed normal. When we got out, though, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces lying next to a tree. All the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet and not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car the night before, and then an animal got into our stuff. I promised that I had locked it and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. Eventually, I found them later on the ground next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home and told me that he had a dream the night before about something kneeling over him in the tent, holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said that he didn't want to talk about it and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I can't. Something wrong happened to us in the woods that night.
This happened last summer. I'm a 32-year-old male, and I live alone in an apartment outside of the city. At the time, I'd just moved in and had thrown away a lot of old stuff that I had from my other place, so I was occasionally scrolling through Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, looking for a few furnishings. The two things I needed the most were a coffee table and a TV stand, but I wasn't in too much of a rush, so I didn't mind searching for a couple weeks if I had to. I remember it being a Monday night, and I had just gotten home from work. I was scrolling through some posts on Craigslist at the dinner table and came by a coffee table that I liked. Cheap, not too old, and in good condition. I sent an email and continued scrolling, but not even 20 seconds later, I got an email reply back. The man, Cole, said he could sell it to me, but it had to be tonight because he was moving out and planned to throw it away in the morning. Having nothing else to do that night, I responded, "Sure, just let me know where to pick it up from." He sent over an address, and I did a quick Google search of it. The house was 25 minutes away in a neighborhood I'd never been to before. I told him to give me an hour and I'd be there. Although I was tired and it was pretty late, I didn't mind doing a quick pickup. I was also just happy to finally get a coffee table for my living room. I finished eating my meal at the table, then got in my car and started driving there. There was a light drizzle outside, so I was hoping the table wasn't too heavy and we could quickly get it in my car without getting water damage. The drive there felt long, going down some windy roads until ending up in a small, poorly lit neighborhood. By poorly lit, I mean that there were very few streetlights, all being dim, and most of the houses had their lights off. It was late, so I didn't expect everyone to be up at this time, but still, it was a bit creepy. When I found the house, it was a small one-story place, one of the few houses that had its lights on. As I turned into the driveway, I saw a man standing in the corner of the garage, seemingly searching for something. When I put the car in park, the man looked over at me, then quickly ran inside. I waited for a minute, thinking he was gonna come back out, but he didn't. I exited my car and walked into the garage, knocking on the door. Then I knocked again, but nobody was answering. I wasn't sure if I should go to the front door or what, but it was giving me a weird feeling, and I was starting to think of just leaving, when the door suddenly opened. It was a different man than I'd seen in the garage, but he introduced himself as Cole. He invited me in to check out the coffee table. I followed him into the living room. The table looked as it did in the pictures, and wasn't broken or anything, so I was good to buy it. Cole was making small talk with me, telling me about his new place he just bought, but every time I tried to interrupt and say I'd like to buy the table, he would keep talking. It started to get uncomfortable, standing there listening to him talk over me for 5 whole minutes. It felt like more of a distraction, like he was keeping me there. I finally just cut him off and said I was in a hurry and needed to get home soon. He stopped talking and said I could have it for free. I suspiciously said okay, then asked if he could help me haul it into my car, and we both grabbed it and started walking it through the house. It wasn't super heavy, but it definitely was a 2-person lift. We got it into the garage and set it down for a rest, but right away, I heard someone running up behind me. They came from the side of the house, running up to me wearing a mask and hoodie. I froze up, both scared and confused. The man wasn't very aggressive, and Cole just stood there with a blank face. The man asked for my wallet and phone, holding up a knife at me. I put my hands up, but I really didn't feel threatened enough to comply. He asked again, louder this time, but I took my chances and sprinted for my car. The man lunged at me, but I kept running, getting in and locking the door before they could do anything. I backed out and drove away, and that's when I noticed a cut on my arm that went through my shirt. The man must have slashed me, but in the moment I didn't even notice. I pulled over a few roads down and called the police, providing them with an address and description of the 2 men. To sum it all up, the cops questioned Cole, which was actually his name, and after a brief interrogation, he admitted the masked man was his buddy and they were just trying to rob me with no intention of selling anything. They were both young and it was their first time trying something like this, so I guess they were nervous and that's why it felt so strange. Lucky for me, the cut on my arm wasn't deep at all, not even needing stitches. When it came down to it, they were given a few charges, but nothing too serious. I'm glad I chose to run though, because I worry that if I had let them take advantage and rob me, then they would have had the confidence to continue doing it. After this though, I don't think they'll be trying that again. My brother owns a really nice RV that he lets me borrow sometimes. We live 15 minutes from each other and in a state that is known for camping, hiking, and just outdoor activities in general. It was last fall when I asked if I could borrow his RV to go camping out by a small fishing pond. The weather was getting too cold to comfortably camp in a tent, so the RV was perfect. I really just wanted to spend a few days fishing out there while enjoying the time to myself. I went over and picked up the RV, then drove it down to the pond. The trail definitely wasn't made for driving on, being narrow and only made of dirt, but I'd usually see tire marks all over it, so I knew that other people did the same as me. This time though, the trail was clear of any other vehicles, and when I got to the pond, there was nobody else around. I parked off to the side in case anyone else did show up. Then I pretty much got everything ready and went out to fish right away. I had a couple beers and just sat back. It was really nice. By 5 o'clock, I started cleaning up and getting all my gear back by the RV, and as I did, a pickup truck pulled in from the trail. It was an older, rusty truck that looked like it had been through a lot over the years. There was no camper attached to it, it was just the truck. It had tinted windows though, so I assumed they were just using the truck to sleep in as well, which isn't the most uncommon thing I've heard of. They parked on the other side of the field and turned off their headlights, but stayed inside. I finished packing my things back into the RV and went in for the night. I looked out a few times to see if the truck was still there, so I could maybe introduce myself to keep things from being weird, but nothing seemed to have changed. It was a little strange to not say hi when you drove out into the middle of nowhere and happened to be in the same vicinity as someone else, but I just went on with my night, getting in bed and falling asleep by 8. At some time during the night, though, I woke up for a minute after hearing a car door open and close. I remember checking out the window and not seeing anyone, and then going right back to sleep. In the morning, I got up and made breakfast, then went back out to fish. The truck was still in the same exact spot as before. It didn't look like they'd done anything, or even left the truck at all. I sat out there fishing for well over 3 hours, not seeing any movement from the truck. It was actually getting really unsettling. Either someone was in there and for some reason not leaving at all, or they had left in the middle of the night when I heard the door open. Both were not normal and made me feel uneasy. I ended up spending the rest of the day in the RV. I couldn't help but feel like they were watching me from inside their truck the whole time I was out there fishing. While in the RV, I looked out the windows multiple times, checking for any change in the truck. But then at just about 7 p.m., I heard the engine to the truck start. I looked out the window and watched as they pulled around and slowly drove up to the trail, like they were about to leave. But then they stopped right in the middle. A few seconds passed before the truck shut off. Seeing them blocking off the trail immediately made my stomach drop. A man stepped out, clearly in a rush, running up to the bed of his truck and grabbing something out of the back. Then he faced the RV. I left the window and locked up the door, hearing footsteps running toward it as I did. The door started shaking aggressively as they tried pulling on it from the other side. My mind at this point was almost in this foggy state where I just had no idea what to do. I ran to the driver's seat and started up the RV as it sounded like the man was trying to pry the door open. I pressed on the gas and went toward their truck, slowing down as I approached the back of it. Hearing the man chasing me down though, I pressed the RV against the truck and pushed it as the man ran over and tried to get back in. Before he could, it slid off the trail and opened up a path for me to get around. I drove out of there and didn't look back until I was on the road. I went a little ways down before I called the police to report what had happened. By the time they got there though, the truck and the man were gone. I can't be sure as to what the man was intending to do. The obvious answer is that he was trying to rob me, both of the RV and everything in it. But then why did he spend so long watching me and setting up a whole trap? Why not just block it off right when he arrived and do everything quickly? It felt like he was watching me, seeing if I was alone, as if he were planning to do more than just taking the vehicle and leaving. I think that if things had gone differently, I would have never been seen after that night.